Well, today I have got an interesting one. Obviously, I'll get my notes up so that we can actually make sure they are 100% correct. And this is all about one of the FBI's most genius plays of all time.
Go on.
The GOAT FBI play, as some refer it to. Now, I got a lot of this info from a great YouTube channel called Fern. Anyone seen that Fern YouTube channel?
No,
really good. Highly recommend it. And they did a video on it, so a lot of the info from there. And I read through the comments, and it all seems legit. So let's start this off with what this is all about. And essentially, it all starts with how criminals work and how they communicate. Now, they don't all just, particularly organized crime this is, and in particular, we're talking like drugs, gangs, things like that, and we're talking about mainly the high level stuff here, not just your local hood rat, right? Now, they all use special phones. I didn't actually know this. I just thought that you just use phones and they whack like a burner SIM card in there, and don't get me wrong, like I said, probably some low level stuff too, but there are some high level phones that they use, and they look very similar to like your iPhone, your Google Pixels, things like that. But what they do is they obviously disable the camera and they disable the GPS. And on those phones, they run a completely different operating system. So it just looks visually to anyone else like you've got a regular phone. And on there, and there were I believe there were three main ones on there, but the two main ones for the sake of this story was one called Phantom Secure and Encrypted. Now, these are obviously highly encrypted services, and it was a real problem for the government, in particular for this story, the FBI, because they were just managing to talk all the time, encrypted.
Wait, who's using these again, sorry?
The criminals.
The criminals using this? My bad, I thought you meant the government was.
Nah, we're talking high-level people. But don't get me wrong, at the same time, I can see why maybe high-level government officials, particularly if they're traveling to other countries.
Can I get an example of a high-level criminal using this? Like what?
Yeah, like a top-end drug dealer.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Cartel leader.
Cartel guy. They're talking about
communities, they know about this operating system.
Yeah. Like, if they wanted to give them the details on where the next drop is or things like that.
Something you see in a movie, really.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And one of the really good features about this is the moment that any of those phones would get seized, they can be remotely wiped.
Okay.
Completely wiped.
Yeah.
And the police were just having so much problems with this. They were essentially bricking these phones, and then obviously none of the content from it can be used in court, so on and so on. And so they started having really big crackdowns on these encryption companies. So your Phantom Secure and Encron, let me get the name of that right. Encrochat, sorry. And Encrochat, and there was a third one. So they started getting rid of them, and it left a massive gap in the market. They managed to get rid of both of those ones. And a fella named Afgu, right? Interesting name. A fellow named Afgu, he was a bit of a dodgy businessman. He had linked up with another gangster who went by the nickname was the Facebook Gangster, due to a bunch of his essentially Facebook scams and crimes that he'd previously committed. And he had noticed a gap in the market since all of these encryption services had gone down. So he decided he was going to create his own one. And this one was really sort of like the most powerful, arguably like the best one. And it was called Anom. So not Anon with an M at the end for Michael. Yeah, Anom. Okay. And if you were to open the phone, it would look kind of normal. So unlike the other ones where it was a different operating system, this would look like a normal one. But in particular, there were three main apps on it.
Yep.
And what you would do is you would go into the calculator app, and then you would type in your real PIN, and then it would open up into the operating system.
Okay.
So again, it was just like another layer of security that was being used. Now, in a weird turn of events, and nobody is actually sure why, but Afgu, the sort of brainchild behind this Anom software for phones, decides to go to the FBI because, and he goes to them and says, I can build you a back door into this.
Wow.
Right. And in this in the video, nobody really understands what his personal motivation for this was. I don't know whether he maybe potentially built it, realized what it could scale into, and then he would be responsible for a lot of crime and maybe didn't necessarily want that.
And so he just dipped.
So he maybe got a bit spooked and just said, my only way out from this now is to go
help
to
the FBI and be willing to cooperate.
Exactly.
If I go there first, it's probably going to be good for me.
Exactly. So they rock up to the FBI, and they obviously were like, yeah, like, we want in. Yeah. We want this. We managed to get rid of the other ones. We don't know what the criminals are going to be using now.
Is he then turning himself in as a result?
No, because he's not necessarily a druggie. He's just built this.
Okay.
It perfectly, like, well, it is legal, ultimately. It's just an encrypted
messaging service.
Messaging service.
This guy made Anom.
This guy made Anom, yeah.
Okay.
There's one issue, though, and it kind of made me laugh when they said this, but it's illegal for the FBI to spy on what people are communicating and looking through. So this backdoor would have been an illegal backdoor. And it's kind of ironic because of the whole like NSA stuff. And I was kind of like, when I first heard that, I was like, that's not stopped them before from doing this type of thing. But maybe it was just too obvious, too much at like large scale, and it's the FBI as well. So anyways, they obviously said like, yeah, we would love to be able to do this, but we can't do this in the US. So they took their Anom phones all the way over to Australia.
Yeah.
Now, for whatever reason, the Australians were like, yeah, fuck it, we'll do this shit.
Yeah.
Like, we'll do this, and the FBI will still have the back door to these Australian criminals, and they start handing out phones. And one of the only way that these, because they can't really go out and advertise like, oh, everybody use Anom. Like, they don't want it to be like that because they're special phones. They cost like, over like $2,000. They say to have one of these phones. Like, they're not just a cheap bit of kit.
Am I going to get stung if I Google one of these?
No, I think you'd be.
Bro's actually gone on incognito.
Yeah, that'll do it. That helps. Yeah.
Yeah, that Indiegogo.
Yeah. You're not going to want to buy one of these anyways, and you'll know why in a minute. But they pass it around, and next thing you know, all the gangsters in Australia, all the drug dealers and everything, this has gone round like wildfire. There is an issue though. The USA isn't allowed to store Australian citizens' messages in their servers. So they needed a middleman. And that middleman they ended up finding was Lithuania. Okay. So they stored all these Anom servers in Lithuania. So that way they could access the messages. They're technically looking into Lithuania, Australian, all the messages get delivered to the servers in Lithuania. Super interesting. But again, just another way that they can get around all these loopholes.
Yep.
Start spreading out, and lo and behold, all these criminals start getting not caught because they can't really do anything about it, right? But one example, and this is a really interesting one, is it starts with the US and it spreads, so they know that this tactic works. They then, in Sweden, there was a gangster who goes by the nickname Microsoft. That was kind of weird. He was using EncroChat. Obviously, that doesn't have working. He jumps on the Anom hype as well, goes away, buys a bunch of these phones, comes back, starts distributing it to his whole team. And police ended up receiving a message or intercepting a message that he had put out a hit on a cafe owner who owed him about 800 grand. And so what the police do, while they couldn't go there and like arrest him because these are all phones that, the moment that they spoil that they know it,
yep,
the whole gig's
everyone
up.
Stops using them,
everyone stops using it, so they're not worth it. So instead, they sort of anonymously tip off the cafe owner, and he evades the hit, and he gets away with it. So that was like the first time, and I believe they do similar things like that, and they low key bust a few people, but it never comes out.
How are they evading a hit? Like how is the cafe owner doing it?
I guess.
I don't know. They don't go into too much detail on how he evades it, but he's just getting a tip off. Like, I think the plan was to shoot him on his doorstep at the cafe. It was something like that, and he just like, I guess the anonymous tip would have been like, don't fucking rock up to your cafe for a little while.
Yeah. Okay.
He doesn't die anyways. And again, there's all these things, all these phones had started spreading across Sweden, and they're busting some people, but they're just not allowed to use any of these messages or anything in court. Goes on, and obviously this has become like hyper successful, really successful for these police forces, better than they ever could have imagined, really. Now, unfortunately, there's a court order for the servers can no longer be held in Lithuania. And I'm not too sure why. In the video, they don't really talk too much about why the time is up, but I think they got permission to do this for 4 years, and this 4 years was running at a time. So the police force were like, look, we're either gonna, we're about to lose this setup that we have here, or we just say, fuck it. And they go on a crazy raid. They raid everybody, all these police forces. It became like a massive news thing. There's all these pictures of people stood in front of like press backdrops saying like we've arrested over like hundreds of people from all these different countries, and it was like one of the biggest police raids, and it was actually classified as the biggest sting in history.
Oh wow!
Because of just the sheer amount of phones that were out there.
It's good PR, that.
And so they just went balls deep. Now, that's great and all, but all these people went to court, and Germany were the first country to say that none of those chats are admissible in court because of the way they obtained the info, which is illegal, spying on citizens like that. So they did all these police work in Germany, and then I believe a number of other countries followed suit. And it was kind of the reason why the USA were never able to do it in their own country, but they kept doing it in like all these other countries. And they did that entire sting. They raided them. Loads of everybody, not everybody, I'm sure a bunch of them did go to jail, but so many of them just walked free because of the thing that they just couldn't use any of the messages in it. And so then there was a massive inquiry, was like, was this like the greatest sting of all time, or was it the biggest waste of all time? And it was just like this massive thing, which is super interesting how they all did it. And it does make you think, you see, when you're like, I don't know if anybody goes on like the dark web or whatever, like nowadays, just know that there is probably some government agency watching you.
I think this was a waste, because if a lot of them did get away,
but they did save a lot of lives.
Yeah,
because they could, without baiting it out,
so they could save
people
from a few hits and stuff.
They also managed to, like, you know, bust people when it came to like drugs.
I might be being dim here, Cal, but when you say they saved their life, how are they telling the person who is trying to be hit, let's say?
Anonymously tipping them off. They might get a letter through something. Maybe they get a text on their phone from a random number.
Right.
Shit like that, I would imagine.
Okay. Sometimes people wouldn't listen to that.
Oh yeah, no, sure. And
yeah,
they died. Probably.
But those people that are in that situation would know it's probably real.
Yeah.
If you owe someone 800 grand and it's a gangster and you get a text saying, don't be here, you're probably going to be like, oh, okay, that's, probably.
Yeah. So the FBI had built this back door into all of this stuff. And then, I found it interesting that Australia were kind of just like, fuck it, like do it around here.
Yeah. They're pretty hot on
that's quite mental. I don't understand how I not heard of that before. It sounds like such a big thing.
Have you ever listened to the Darknet Diaries, you guys?
No.
The podcast. It's really good. And I just looked up because they had an episode on this. But they've got some really interesting stories like that. Definitely worth listening to if you're interested.
Yeah, I find things like that just the most interesting thing. And then it's a classic case of, like, you know, all these drug dealers and, you know, criminals and stuff, like you have the evidence there that these are their messages and they did it. But just because the information was obtained illegally,
they just couldn't
use it, because then if you say yes to that, then you're opening up like a massive can of worms.